Hey there, friends. So, as I promised in my previous video, I wanted to just talk about what learning the pips, or learning the numerology anyway, of the pips has taught me about the Rider-Waite-Smith system. As I've rambled about in several videos over the last year, it's a system that I've actually been moving away from for various reasons. Uh, One is we just evolve, our tastes change, we get interested in learning new things, and a good way to avoid stagnation is to constantly find new systems, new things that intrigue us, just, to keep ourselves learning. But as I was doing my research and my distillation of the numerology, there were moments as I was going through that I found, oh, that actually makes sense. Or, I always thought about the image on the Rider-Waite-Smith deck as suggesting this when, it may actually be suggesting this other thing. So, it doesn't have, the one of the difficulties of the Rider-Waite-Smith system is that it actually can feel somewhat inconsistent. Because, the numerology does not, it's not in the style of that, and they're not meant to be read in that way. But this, I guess what I'm trying to get at is actually learning the numerology can help you learn what's happening in the pictures if you want to. But it can also kind of reacquaint you with this deck. And this isn't to say I'm probably going to go right back to it. In fact, I haven't used like a straight up Rider-Waite-Smith deck for a reading for anybody in a while. And when I use them in videos, it's mostly just to choose images that are familiar. But that's also, it's also worth mentioning that I love Pamela Coleman Smith's artwork. And this deck, it was my first, in fact, this was my very first deck. I don't know if you can see how in bad, I mean, it really is in rough shape. This one got soaking wet in a rainstorm in New York City as I was walking through Manhattan. And, I thought, oh, maybe I should get rid of it, but it's your first love. You don't throw it away. And I actually do like my decks to look worn out. So what I thought I would do is just kind of talk through the numerology as I've been learning them, and what that connected with me, because these images are seared into my brain, so they're always there when I'm reading. Whether or not I call upon them, they're there. So the aces are actually pretty straightforward, and I think, again, if you wanted to see what I'm referencing, this is on my website. This is my little distillation. So the aces we know, in fact, I probably won't take a whole lot of time on these because it's probably the most clear-cut iteration. They're about seeds, potential, and raw energy, and you really do get that feeling with Pamela Coleman Smith's drawings, because you've got this sort of this eruption. It may be a step beyond what the more traditional A1 meaning is numerologically. Which is like it's like the moment before action in my learning, like the conception, but so we have the ignition point in Coleman Smith's drawings, but it's still a very similar representation. And I think the Pamela Coleman Smith's Ace of Pentacles, I think, has and always will be my favorite. But with the two, I think you actually do get, when looked at, a relationship between the image in at least three of the cases, because what I learned as to is duality, balance, diplomacy, receptivity, choice, negotiation, and opposing forces. And you certainly get a sense of duality and balance in the pentacles and the swords. It's straight up exactly what we're seeing. Um, and I think, you know, incredibly appropriate for the iteration of the number and the suit, like the filtering of the number and the suit. When I think about duality or balance or choice in pentacles or coins in the earth element, what I'm thinking about is the way that life pulls us in a lot of directions, and we have to balance all of those things. You know, we need a work life balance, we need a balance of money of coming in and money going out, we need a balance of activity to rest, we need a balance of uh god, completely gone off track, of like ambition and family life and relationships, you know what I mean, all of those things. And in the two that Pamela Coleman Smith gave us, I feel like, you know, what we get is someone juggling life. And likewise with the Two of Swords, again, for me, when two is filtered through air, what we get is balanced thinking, objectivity, the ability to look at two sides of an issue, the ability to communicate two sides of an issue clearly and effectively, and to not tip the scales. And I feel like she gives us exactly that. So it's kind of breathtaking to, you know, go backwards in my way and sort of, this is where I started, and see how that has connected to where I've come and what I've been learning. With the Two of Cups, you know, there is this idea of receptivity, of partnership, a little bit in terms of negotiation, um, and I think you get even an idea of yeah, partnership, negotiation, duality. So you get in two filtered through a cup, so through water, is that it's being emotionally balanced, it's being connected to another, it's being able to negotiate the feelings of another with your own, kind of like the return on investment. So being able to negotiate not giving too much or taking too much. And then with the the Two of Wands, rather, this is where it's a little bit harder to make the connection, because you know, you have this image of someone kind of staring out into the distance, and there's a quality of longing there, or uh, kind of planting the seeds of business or project, kind of letting the idea take form. But, you know, in there, I guess you could say you have a sense of balance because you don't want to act too soon. And so in this sense, you could call this a card of restraint. You know, you're not ready to set the ship sailing, and so you don't yet. You wait until the time is right. Do you get duality or receptivity or choice, partnership out of that? You know, and this is why this is so difficult, or why the Rider-Waite-Smith deck is so difficult, because it is inconsistent in this way. But, you know, with enough thought, you probably could force this to make sense. You know, how does this deal with duality? You know, there is the pull of action and inaction early in the creation of a project, which is two filtered through fire, restraint, passionate restraint. But, you know, again, this is where things kind of fall down, but you can make it work. And I think one of the reasons why I'm doing this is because I said before, I wish that I had learned the pip system first, because I think it would have made it easier to remember this. So, you know, but again, you can also choose to ignore the image. So then with the three, things get interesting. The three is about creativity, growth, growing, collaboration, two becoming one, fertilization, triangulation. So it's a very three-like thing. And in this regard, you get it again kind of in the cups and the pentacles, but the other two are a little harder to make work. But you do get collaboration and creativity and growth, and a coming together of two becoming one in the pentacles, and you get it similarly in the cups. In the swords, it's a harder stretch. What you don't see is collaboration, but what you do get is growth. You know what I mean? Because of the pain that's depicted, you will grow. You get growth in the Three of Wands as, action turns to, inaction or planning turns to action. And so you do get that, but it's not a very collaborative image. With the fours, is especially interesting to me because the four is about structure, it's about solidity, organization, established systems, it's pragmaticism, and conservatism. And this is one example where you have really divergent views here. You kind of get pragmatism and conservatism. You absolutely get pragmatism and conservatism in the Four of Pentacles. The Four of Cups is one of the most bizarre and interesting images in Pamela Coleman Smith's, creation. It's so unusual, because what you traditionally feel is apathy. But again, there could be like an emotional conservatism here. Like an inability to recognize a new feeling because it doesn't fit in with what you've established. And so what looks like apathy could be conservatism, or it could be the crumbling of conservatism, as the willfulness kind of goes away. And then in the four in the of swords and wands, you get a sense of structure with the wands, but it doesn't feel like this celebratory thing. And then with the swords, it's very pragmatic to rest, but it is interesting. So I again, like, spending time with the numbers, you could probably find something in here, but it is, and this is just purely coming out of a place of like, this has been on my mind and it's interesting. The fives, I think, actually connect really well to the idea of disruption of stability, upheaval, discord, conflict, and then in their lighter element, expansiveness and new cycles, breaking out of that structure. And so, you can look at the Five of Pentacles as poverty, certainly. You can also look at it as breaking out of the systems of religion, breaking out of the emotional structures that you've been part of. You know what I mean? So where the four is this like willful refusal to break free of the structures, in the five you break free of the structures and it hurts because you weren't willing to make the change yourself, and life made the change for you anyway. Conflict and disruption is inevitable in any project, and I think that's pretty clearly demonstrated in the Five of Wands. And then in the Five of Swords, again, there is disruption, but it doesn't connect with the way that I think about the filtering of five through air, which is disruptive thinking, which can be both good and bad. But this feels like a communicative disruption, which does filter. Air is not about just thoughts. It's about communicating. It's about what we say, how we express our thoughts. It can even be about writing, because the swords are sometimes depicted as pens. And so it could be disruptive communication. But again, it's the image there, it has a more kind of base conflict. So Six is about reharmonization after the destruction, so, or the disruptiveness. So you come through on the other side, whether or not you want to. Whatever disrupts doesn't disrupt forever. You do come through with it. So it's like reunion or reharmonization, transcending problems, overcoming obstacles, reconciliation, and balance. Um, and here you don't like the connection is really kind of nebulous. There may be a little bit of harmony depicted here, and certainly there's like a healing to a degree. Even in the swords, there's like a healing because you're moving on, but the relationship to the number is really kind of slim. But it will inform a reading, you know what I mean? And that's the other thing about why I'm talking about this, is that when I do eventually come back to a Rider-Waite-Smith reading, because I will, I'm not going to forget the numerology, even though I don't necessarily see reharmonization or reconciliation here. Like, this feels like leaving a problem behind, and less like resolving it. But it'll be there. The sevens. Now, seven, I talked about in my previous video, is I've learned to interpret kind of differently than maybe more common, which is this idea of like new growth or growing through. I have a little bit of like an evolutionarily necessary turning inward to check in on the progress, because if we think of the numbers as a progression, we start with the seed and then we create, and then our creation starts yielding results in the three. In the four, the building of systems and the stability of previous systems allows us to start to put up the shell. Five comes along and new ideas, new plans, things we weren't expecting come in and change it for better or worse. In six, we deal with that. And in seven, we kind of check in with ourselves and say, how are we doing on the inside? That's how I view it. And I do feel like you get that with the Seven of Pentacles and the Seven of Cups. Less so with the Seven of Swords and Wands. But, there's like a solitude to these cards, which does fit in to all four of them, which does fit into me with the inner nature of the seven energy. So you've got the Seven of Pentacles checking in on how the work we've done in life this far is making us feel fulfilled or not. In the seven, we're going in and looking at all the options that lay ahead for our relationships based on what has happened so far. In the wands and the swords, it's a little bit different, you know what I mean? But you do, I think, if you want to push, you get a sense of, like, with the wands, kind of checking in with inner conflict. Are the passions that I had still the passions that I have? Is this project still as important to me as I thought it was? Is the energy that I'm expending on it worth what may be the end results? And then the Seven of Swords, it's a tough one. Again, it is the inconsistency of this deck that frustrates people who have a systematic approach. And it's why, I have read a lot of books about the Rider-Waite-Smith Tarot and the symbolism in it. There's a book by Walden Ruth Ann Amberstone that I really like. Can I see the title from here? It's, oh god, I'm gonna go look. It's called The Secret Language of Tarot. And then there's another book that I can't remember the authors of that's all about the hidden, the symbolism of the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. And then the Tarosophy folks, whose names escape me at the moment, they have a book about the Rider-Waite-Smith. So I've read a lot about the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. And every book will say there's nothing accidental in the deck. And that Pamela Coleman Smith made the choices to depict what she did with a systematic approach. the problem is that we don't have access to that system. You know, she didn't record her notes, and Waite didn't seem concerned enough with that to bother, you know, writing down anything about it either. And the system was very clearly not numerology. I think from what I've read, it has more to do with astrology, which again I have a hard time connecting with. I've also, you know, the relationship between tarot and Kabbalah is interesting, but even in my reading about Kabbalah, I don't see a consistency of the Kabbalistic numerology filtered through the suit. You know, I don't look at wisdom, for example, or kingdom filtered through air as what is depicted. So it's an interesting thing that we go through when we're learning with the Rider-Waite-Smith system, which most of us seem to do, because it's like learning English. And I guess it makes... I hadn't thought about this before, but, you know, my bachelor's degree is in writing and English. And one of the things I've always marveled at is how anybody who grew up speaking any other language learns English enough to speak it. Native English speakers have a really, especially in the United States, have a tendency to be really nasty about anyone who speaks English as a second language and the way that they speak it. And all that betrays to me is a real ignorance of their own language, because English is an absolute and complete mess of a language. It's a beautiful language, you know what I mean? I liked it enough to study it and spend my life writing it. But to me, what's beautiful about it is how messy it is, and that it is it's appropriated so many other languages. But it's messy. I don't know how anybody learns it. Our idioms are strange and don't make sense, in part because they come from different languages. The rules of English came after the language did as a way to standardize things. And spelling has flat out been a mess from the beginning, because again, the rules came later. The words have almost all been borrowed from other languages. And because so many of them have been, the rules aren't consistent. So Latinate words are going to be spelled differently than Germanic sourced words. The rules don't apply. So even when we have, you know, I before E except after C, except for ... you know what I mean? English is a messy language. It's very difficult to learn. You know, so let that be a lesson to anyone who has a speak English if you live here attitude to things, because you know what, it's not easy. It's native English speakers have a really terrible time speaking it too, by the way. You know, I mean, naturally, you listen to anyone on the street speaking English who's a native speaker, and they're going to say stuff that is grammatically incorrect. And that, you know, that's not a criticism, but it means that you shouldn't criticize anyone else. Anyway, where I was going with this is that English is such a messy language. The Rider-Waite-Smith system is an English system of card, and in a way, it's as messy as the English language because it is pulled from so many things. You know, one of the refreshing things in going through the pip-based cards, I'm not going to find a single pip here, am I? Is that, you know, you choose a system and you learn it, you know? And so here I have the Six of Swords, and I know that the Six is about harmony, reunion, unity, sympathy, transcending problems, overcoming obstacles. And so I know that the swords are connected to air, and the air is about intellect, thought, communication. And so I know that here with this card, I'm using my intellect to overcome obstacles and reunify. So I'm using the wisdom that life has given me. I'm using clear communication skills to reunify, to dissolve conflict. You know, when I go back to the sixes of the Rider-Waite-Smith system, it's not that simple. You know what I mean? Going back to the six would actually be wise. You know, looking at the Six of Swords for Pamela Coleman Smith, has nothing to do with using the intellect to dissolve conflict. And the interesting thing is, and this is so, I love doing these videos because I like start getting totally nerded out by them. Is that when we're reading with Rider-Waite-Smith systems, we often don't even think much about the element of the suit. Like, how many times, and and I've had this done in readings that people have given me, and I bet people have done it too that are watching this. You say, oh, something bad has happened, and you move on. So you're leaving back, something bad has happened, you're mourning it and you're moving forward, and there's the island and the distant shore, and you're going to heal. So you get a little bit of healing and the reunification, but what does any of that have to do with the mind? Nothing. You know what I mean? I because the element has become important to me over the years, I tend to say, well, this is like a mental journey or communicate. So your mind is going to help you heal from the past and move forward. It's not a literal journey to me. And probably people who have, gotten really good at working with the elements have their own way of doing that. But when you learn, when you pick up almost any book that uses the Rider-Waite-Smith system as a source, almost at no point does anyone use that card and talk about intellect, thinking, or communicating anything. You know what I mean? It's so fascinating, and it's hard to learn because of that. Because you have to learn 78 different meanings. And we do, you know what I mean? And we evolve and we grow. And I'm not saying there's anything bad with that. I'm just saying that it's like learning English to a non-native speaker, because the rules are so bizarre. The Six of Cups in this deck seems to be about remembering and nostalgia, and that's like a very traditional interpretation of that card. But the Six of Cups in a pip reading would be more about reconciling after a fight, you know what I mean, with a friend or a loved one, reunifying, finding the beauty again, healing from a conflict, or letting a disruption take us to a new higher emotional journey, a reconciliation, a new level of trust that comes after coming through conflict together. You don't get that here. So it's a completely different system, and it's very interesting to me. Anyway, the metaphor that I was reaching for there, as I got so excited about looking at this way, is that the Rider-Waite-Smith system is very English language, because the rules sometimes apply. If we look at the nines, say, sorry, I'm just going to tidy up because the mess was driving me nuts. It was almost as messy as the English language. If we look at the nines, so 9 does have an element of anxiety to me, as I mentioned in a previous video. The 9 for me is a bit more conflict laden than it is traditionally interpreted as. And I made the effort as I was studying, as I said, to choose a more shadowy base for that card, because so many of the other meanings in 1 through 10 have a lighter base to them. The only one that has a kind of conflict base is the 5. And as I've said many, many times, there's light and shadow in all of them, but the 5 is the only one that starts with a shadow, right? And so I chose a more shadowy 9. So the idea of abandonment of perfection, anxiousness due to uncertainty. So we're heading into the final mode, and we don't know if we're going to get there, or we don't know if what we're going to get when we get there is what we wanted, and so we're feeling anxious about it. Giving up on perfectionism is something that's really interesting, because in order to finish anything you do, but if you're a perfectionist, you know how hard and how conflict laden giving up perfectionism can be. We look at the 9s, and the only one that really has a sense of that is the Nine of Swords and Wands, and very, very different ways. You get anxiety, but it doesn't feel like the anxiety of finishing something. It just feels like anxiety. It feels like terror. It's very similar in the Nine of Wands. There's like the bruised nature of having gone this far and having to gird yourself to make the final push. But it doesn't necessarily connect across the board. You don't get anxiety here or here. In fact, you don't even get a sense necessarily of making a final push. So it's hard to learn this because the relationship applies to the number and sometimes it doesn't. Anyway, I'm as always, probably most of what I'm saying doesn't make any sense. I don't know. What I probably should do when I do videos like this is make notes of what I want to achieve. The ultimate goal was to explore how the numerology can relate to what's in the deck. Also, what I learned about the Rider-Waite-Smith images from learning numerology, I've clearly gotten away from that a little bit, but the connections are so interesting, and then where they're not there, they're interesting. You don't, for example, get much anxiety or abandonment of perfection or anxiousness due to uncertainty or even getting what you put in out of this or even this. But there is a lovely for this I would really want to see is the Seven of Pentacles, although the Seven of Pentacles does reflect my reflection of the number, but this has a more Seven of Pentacles feel for me. So anyway, it's been really interesting to see where the relationship applies and where it doesn't. Like this a bit feels more like the Nine of Wands for me than this does. In a way they should almost be switched. For me, like this is the final push to get where you want to go, and then you got through it. And anything worth doing is costly. You do have a sense of emotional completion here and here. Here, I don't ever. I guess there is like a mental completion to the Ten of Swords, in a very melodramatic way. It's a bit like a hissy fit and then throwing a tantrum and then collapsing to the ground. But again, I mean, I've because I learned the system without the idea of looking at numbers, I always viewed the 8, 9, and 10 as its own little mini suit within the suit of swords. But again, it has very little to do with everything that came before it. This is feeling trapped in the mind, this is a panic attack, and this is the aftermath of a panic attack. So it does apply to the suit, but it doesn't necessarily apply to the number relationship. And in a reading, it's very difficult, if you are going to focus on the numerology, to see this card and say, well, you're at the end of a mental journey, and you might, you can feel very drained. Everyone's seen this card with the glare is very bad. You can feel this drained at the end of anything that's intellectual. Say you're graduating from school, you're in finals week, you just finished your finals. You could feel that way, but it doesn't necessarily reflect as Kelly from The Truth and Story says, you get one aspect of the card, of the iteration in many cases, and that's what's depicted. And I guess, ultimately that's why, over the years, I have moved away from this system. And even when I'm working with decks that have, by and large, that have more situational pips, they're not so married to the Rider-Waite-Smith. Although, that Ten of Swords in my favorite sort of bridge deck, the Wild Unknown, I mean, it's as gory a picture as that. So it's interesting, and that in a way it's like it's good, because just like the numerology will always be there when I read with situational pips, the situational images will be there when I read with the numerology of tarot. And then as I've seen a lot of videos about, well, maybe not a lot, but as I've seen videos about, the numerology of tarot is different from astrological numerology, biblical numerology, Kabbalistic numerology, um, uh, even numerology. You know what I mean? Tarot numerology is rooted in other things. Partly in all of those and partly not. So again, in a way, there's a bit of chaos to tarot in general. Because it's, it wasn't designed to do what we use it for. It's a game. So no one probably, who knows, but it doesn't seem likely that anyone sat down and said, I really need to make sure that everything looks the way it does for a reason, because it was a game. And then the Golden Dawn came along and said, but ... And without the Golden Dawn, we probably wouldn't, if you think about, especially in the United States, the relationship to tarot is almost exclusively based on the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, because it's so easy to get and it's everywhere. We probably wouldn't have connected to it without that deck, for all its messiness and for all its flaws, which is why I'll never, not love it. But the Golden Dawn came along and gave us, at least again in the United States or the English-speaking world, tarot as we know it today. And certainly, there were others that came before with the Marseille decks and Atea and Papus and Regardy and all of the French people. But if you think about the more European-based systems like Lenormand, I don't know when Lenormand, I feel like about 5 or 6 years ago was when Lenormand started blowing up, but before then I had never heard of it. And without the Golden Dawn giving us what they did, and without Waite and his convoluted systems, we may not have tarot in the same way we have it today. We wouldn't have tarot in the same way we today, but it might be like, I don't know, we might have invented something else. Maybe we would have discovered Lenormand sooner in the States as a I don't know, it's interesting to think about those things, but for better or worse, what we have today, we have because of the convoluted system that Waite gave us. And in that way, there's always a loyalty to his work. But the more that I read and the more that I learn, the more drawn I am to not being locked in to a picture exclusively. But that, to say that I won't use decks like that anymore would be nuts, just given the amount of money I've spent on decks over the years. But what it's done is it's also freed me up to think about decks like Tarot of the Trees, which is what I've started calling a bridge deck. It sort of lives between a pip deck and a situational pip deck. Obviously the Wild Unknown, the Pagan Otherworlds, which I had mixed feelings with when I first got it in my hands, but I've come around on. I'm just looking at my reading table, like the Bohemian, like there's so many decks that I've gotten, the Wooden Tarot, that I don't want to give up, and that I'm sure I'll still use, but that, there's this now whole other layer that wasn't that hard to learn. And that's the other thing that's nice about the PIP system, is that, once you do this, or however you get there, and I really, really think you should, and this is just me, and, take what I say with a grain of salt, although know that I am an adult learning specialist in my corporate life. And I know that memorizing something is not as sticky as doing the work and researching and finding it for yourself. But once you do that work, it's amazing how quickly you internalize it. And then it's literally just a matter of turning over the cards and saying, in the context of what we're seeing, you know what I mean? So we have the 10, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. This deck I have to count more because there's no numbers on it. So we've got the 10 of wands, we've got the 7 of swords, and we've got the 8, the 8 of cups. So there's a little bit more counting. But, I know that the 5 of wands, the 10 of wands rather, is about the completion of a creative project, right? Because 10s are about completion, culmination, realization, the final manifestation. So, and wands for me I think about creativity and passion in a very practical way. I think of wands as projects, or like you're the thing that you're doing at work that you're really passionate about, or the novel you've been writing, or whatever. And then you're going in, so you've got you're at the end of this project. Now what that's giving you in your mind, 7s are about reflection, inspiration, interchange, reevaluation, listening to your inner voice, etc. So you finished the project, and now you're going in to check in with yourself and say, how do I think about this? What have I learned about this? And then having come out of the project, you also need to come back to your emotional life and do some work, because 8's, I didn't talk about that when I was going through, because I went on another tangent, but 8's about work, hard work for me, concentration, thoroughness, the real manifestation and skill, practical application, right? All those things that we see in the 8 of Pentacles. But here we're talking about that energy through cups, through water. So I have to do the emotional work now. So I may have dedicated a lot of time and thought to this project, and everyone in my life may have been permissive of that. But now that I've done that, and I'm checking in with myself, one of the things I know is I need to come back and put some work into my relationships. If I were looking at these cards in the Smith deck, I would have a man carrying 10 heavy sticks. I would have a man walking away from a tent with a bundle of swords. And I would have, oh God, what's the 8 of cups look like? Someone walking away from spilled cups, or walking away from cups. So completely different. But this is an easy way to read. So if you're learning tarot, I would say start here. I wish I had. Now, I don't wish I had. Like, that's easy to say. I'm glad that I learned the way that I did, because it was interesting, and I've read a lot of great books, and I love, I have mixed feelings about Waite, but I have no mixed feelings about Pamela Coleman Smith. Her art just gets me. It's so weird and pretty, and it's so evocative, and oh my God, this is probably my favorite Empress card. I love her Empress. I love it. I love these trees. I love the wheat. I mean, this is the first tarot card I ever saw before I had a deck in a book. I can't remember the name of it, but it was by Emily Peach, and I remember this image in black and white, and just God, it's so stunningly beautiful to me. It's just, there are cards in this deck I don't like, but there are the Hermit. I have hermits that I love. I mean, if I think about the Hermit from a purely aesthetic standpoint, probably the Wild Unknown Hermit is one of my favorites, but this is the Hermit in my head, I hate this card. It's ugly as shit. But it is what it is. I mean, the Hanged Man is the Hanged Man. I remember going through this deck for the first time and seeing this Death card, and I remember like the visceral reaction that I had to it. This Temperance card has always drawn me in. The Tower card is another one I remember having a really visceral reaction to. You just don't escape. And again, I'm showing you this, anyone who knows Rider-Waite-Smith knows that this is traditionally viewed as the ugliest iteration of the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. This is the original Rider-Waite tarot pack that comes in the purple and gold box. But, had the Centennial Edition come out, I probably would have gotten that one, but this was years before then. You know what I mean? Like, this was my first deck. My favorite Knight of Pentacles, I think, is this guy. I think my favorite King of Pentacles, maybe in the Universal Waite is a little prettier than this one, but I remember looking at this. Yeah, so I'll never lose my love for Pamela Coleman Smith. But one of my goals this year, as I've talked about, I am rambling so much longer than I meant to. One of my goals this year is to make tarot practical. And I will say that the method of reading with pips has yielded more practical results for me so far this year. So anyway, I've completely gone off track from my original goal, which was just sort of what I meant to do when I sat down was to talk about how the numerology can enhance and does appear in Smith, but I got away from that. Anyway, but you hopefully forgive me if you've lasted 45 minutes, then hopefully you're having a good time. So I'm going to stop this nonsense, and I'm going to wish you a lovely week, and I hope this was interesting, and thank you for listening to my ramble, and be well.